Anything's possible.
I know. I don't need, there are humans here.
Oh.
Well, I guess we should just talk because we're here and we're live and it's going to be recorded. And I barely figured out even how to get this thing started because we just don't do live things like ever. But we're here live. And I think we can see that there's, like 6 people now. I can see a chat, but I don't think anything's been written. So if you've written a chat, rewrite a chat because we don't see it. But here we are.
I'm just going to let you.
No, you're not.
Well, thank you to those of you who decided to share whatever hour of your day this is with us. We thought we would hop on here and do this because we rarely give people the chance to interact with us in this kind of way. Jacqueline set this up, so I have no idea what we're doing. But the chat is active, right? So people can access the chat to ask questions.
Yes, someone has chatted in, hello, beautiful people. So we know it works. So it was both.
Their camera might not be working, but yeah.
What do you mean? Their camera.
Our camera?
Oh, no, I think it is because we can see ourselves.
Okay.
I don't understand. Okay, but we know the chat is working. So I guess we will say if you have any questions at any point, please put them into the chat. If you want to share where you're viewing from, you can. If you want to just sit there and see what happens, you also can. We will be here probably for up to the hour, but we'll see what kind of interaction we get, and we'll go from there. Did anyone ask questions when you posted the link online?
They didn't, so we can talk about anything.
All right, you ask me something, and then I'll ask you.
I can't imagine. I don't know. What do I want to ask you?
I don't know. You should put yourself on the screen.
I should put myself on the screen, like this.
Just stay over here. You're leaning with your face cut off.
I always lean. What did you think of The Mandalorian last night?
We're both Star Wars fans. We both watched the finale of The Mandalorian. I guess the best way I can describe it is that I definitely enjoyed the episode, but only if it was not supposed to be the final episode of the final season. It felt like it left too much open. There are too many unanswered questions.
All right. That's a good answer without giving anything away in case people want to watch it and they haven't seen it yet.
Yes. Oh, this is fascinating information. Someone has said they don't make it easy to join the chat. You have to sign in and have a channel.
And have a channel?
Oh, that's like a thing YouTube is doing now. Basically, before you could just have a YouTube account, but you didn't have to have a channel.
Right.
But now everyone's account is a channel, which it was anyway, because if you had an account, you could post, but they're making it very explicit that this is a channel and you can post videos. And if you haven't filled out certain settings, you can't participate in chats. It's very
I would find that
silly.
intimidating.
But thank you for letting us know that and for letting anyone else know who might be coming in.
Yeah.
Even though it's a small group.
It is a small group.
Yeah.
Well, it's good to know, and it's actually good to know for the future too. Not that we do many of these things, because as we were coming on, what did you say when you were about to turn the camera on? You're like,
I said, why do I schedule myself to speak with the humans? Why do I do this to myself? Okay, I have a question for you. I've never asked you this before.
I might answer.
Do you
We'll
remember the first autistic individual you ever worked with?
Yes, I do.
Would you tell us that story? I don't know this story.
Yes, you do.
I don't know if
you do.
I must know the story, but I might not have cemented it in my mind. That was the first time.
It truly was the individual that I talk about in our TED Talk. So
I don't remember what you said in our TED Talk.
It's great. It was really impressionable. No, I had moved to Rhode Island and I took a job in a sensory integration clinic, which was hilarious to me because I had only worked with traumatic brain injury individuals before, and I loved all the neuroscience of all of that. But when I moved to Rhode Island, I couldn't get a job the way that I had wanted or had been working when I was in North Carolina. And so I took this job in this pediatric clinic, but I never wanted to work with kids. Like, that was not a thing I wanted to do. And the job was available. I took it, and I knew that I could use several of the theories that I knew, like cognitive behavioral theories and sensory integrative theories and neurodevelopmental theories. So I was like, I'm just going to try it. And I wound up being asked to kind of take over the caseload for the owner of the business. And so she had kind of like the selected caseload. And the first day of my job that I walked into was a child who was diagnosed as autistic, and his name was Cody, and the behaviorist was there. That whole story is very true and very honest, where they wanted me to use a sticker chart, and I had no idea what I was doing with that, and it just didn't work for me at all. But I knew that there was something that I really connected with that kid about, and I haven't looked back since. So, autistic people, they're my favorites.
We are good people.
Indeed.
Because we're not people. Or like dragons and mystical creatures and such.
Something like that. So that is a true story. And actually, almost my entire caseload at that time was comprised of autistic children. So I got a really steep learning curve really fast.
With no support, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's true.
I asked you a question.
Now I have to ask you a question?
Well, if you think of one, you do. I don't know if I can think of another one right now for you.
I'm going to ask you a question.
Okay.
So I think most people know that you were diagnosed as an adult. And you had like this amazing support system growing up, which kind of protected you, which kept you from realizing the depth of your challenges that are posed by autism for you at sometimes. But what was it that sent you first looking to the diagnosis of autism? Like, what did you see? Because it was kind of a parallel process to the work we were doing.
Yeah, it's really hard to remember. I mean, I remember I was with you more often around your work, and we went to some presentation that some guy was talking at. He's an important guy.
Ami Klin. Yep.
Yeah. And they showed a video of like a triangle, a circle, and a square.
Yep.
That was the video. And at one point, and these shapes are like bouncing around, doing things, like bouncing around.
They're moving on the screen.
They're ricocheting all over the place. And then at one point, at some ricochet, everyone started cracking up. They were laughing. And I looked at Amy and I said, don't do things in my peripheral vision.
That's not what she said.
That's not what I said, but that's what I'm saying now. I looked at Amy and I said, I don't get it. Like, everyone was just laughing. And then it comes out that these people are out of their minds because apparently when you watch these shapes on the screen, you're supposed to know that like a shape is like, they're like interacting. I don't even remember the story. I feel like there's a bully.
It's like the social attribution
someone's
task.
Bullying, like the square is bullying the triangle. I don't know what it is. I was like,
there's a large triangle and a small triangle and a little circle and a little circle and the small triangle are friends.
So up to that point, you had made it very clear to me, and I had the language to name all of my sensory disasters, I'll call them. But that was like...
We called you a sensory nightmare.
A sensory nightmare. That's what we called me. It's okay for people to do it to themselves, but not other people to say those things. But that was like the first time that I was like clinically, there is a social difference here. I'm still not sure why I'm in the clinical ranges and the people making up stories about shapes are normal, but we'll let them believe that because they can't handle the truth. And so from that point, I think I just started, it's very easy now, luckily, to find the stories and tales and sharings and musings of autistic adults and autistic advocates who are sharing their stories. And when I looked at those stories about people's burnouts and other things, I was like, this is the first time I've ever read the accounts of other humans and thought, that's just like me. That is my life. And then I didn't really have a phase where I was like, am I making this up? Is it real? I was just like, oh,
this fits.
It was just like, this makes so much sense. Here, every year of my life, every stage of my life, everything that has gone catastrophically wrong when it did, it all just made total sense. So that was how it's hard to say now because a lot happened.
And there was a lot happening at that time.
I processed a lot and I thought about it a lot, and I can't recall all of those ponderings. I do know that it wasn't ponderings like, no, I'm just faking it, or like it was like, here's another way.
Oh yeah.
Or like you do find things where you're like, wait, does it have to be? Do I have to have this? Does it have to look like this? And then you realize, no, it doesn't in most cases. So that's really where I came from.
Well, I was just curious, like what you would go back to, because we had been kind of supporting your regulation for a while.
To be honest, going back to the burnout too, to see, because like you said, all of my childhood and young adulthood, I was really well supported. And while I would look back at things and they're like funny or they fit so well, or I'm like, oh my gosh, yes, nothing was nothing was debilitating. Even like wetting my bed through my senior year of high school to me wasn't debilitating, because I also luckily have like no social motivation and I didn't care what it held me back from or whatever other things it would. I know there's a link to social, but I can't really even figure it out. So it's great. It's very protective. But when I was working a full-time job for the first time, it only took 2 weeks for all of my function and my mental health to go completely down the drain.
Right.
And to see that shift and how fast it happened without the supports I had was also extremely telling. I was on the edge of suicidal.
Right.
I was checking in with myself every day. I wasn't suicidal because I would tell myself, no, I don't want to die. It's like I cannot figure out how to live. But I was exhausted all the time. I felt like I was beat up all the time. I was melting down and shutting down constantly. It was the first time I had a huge mismatch between my own profile and the environment I was in, and I was not a functional being in any way. So also to see that difference in myself was huge, to know what happens when I don't have the things I need.
There are a few things from that night that stand out for me. One is
Which night?
From the night where Amy was speaking with the social attribution task.
With the shapes, the human shapes.
So one was that you had agreed to go with me to this thing, which was great because it was at night, and that was a big deal that you were going to leave your house
at night.
And drive. You drove.
I drove.
You drove.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, exactly. And so that was a whole big deal. And I remember going through this whole thing and your face being like, what are they seeing? Like, why are people laughing?
It was overwhelmed.
And then there were, and I know Ami and I know him well. So like I was going up and speaking to him afterwards and everything, but, and introduced you and whatnot. But there was a woman in the audience that night who's a mother of an autistic child. And she was one of the first people that I had heard really talk about masking. This woman may have masked well in certain situations, maybe her job.
This is why I don't put cameras on. I play with myself. Okay.
But there wasn't anybody in the room that night who didn't know who she was and know that she was an autistic, except you, that she was an autistic woman. Like she
Okay.
definitely was. And I remember going, that's not masking in reference to her, like, because it was very easy for me to see her as autistic. But this person next to me is a mastermind of it, because I still hadn't put together all the pieces for you, but I was starting to put them together. And then the other part of it I remember is I was just so like excited because we had gone to this lecture and seen Ami and whatever, and we were chatting, and I'm with Jacqueline. I'm like, do you want to go get coffee or something? And you're like, no.
What a terrible idea at that time.
And then it was like,
I do love coffee.
I know, but you pinned it on Rue. You pinned it on your dog. Your dog
Well,
mom.
that's true.
I know. You had to get home to Rue. Dog mom life.
Yeah.
I know.
Oh, here she is. Yeah, I do remember that night very vividly, except for this other human that apparently was in my proximity that I don't know.
She was behind you to the right.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. So that's some of our history. Oh, man. Well, no one has questions, so our questions must be pretty good. That's what I'm taking away from that.
Is that or we're just like there's still people here.
There's humans.
There are still humans here, or they can't figure out how to access the chat, which is important for us to know for the future.
People keep hearing, okay, someone has contributed. Great. I keep hearing stories of autistic burnout, and I wonder if this is something all autistics face at some point. I ask as a parent of an autistic child, and this worries me a lot. So I don't think it is a fact that all autistic people have gone through a burnout. It is pretty well established that for far too many female presenting people, especially, that they come to their diagnosis through a burnout, a similar tale to what I have. They come to some environment that takes them out very quickly in all the wrong ways, and maybe they've had
not for coffee.
Maybe they've had several other diagnoses or other things that people have labeled them as, but there's still this kind of bias of autistic being boy, male,
Right.
well, really boy because young,
Right.
and so they were missed, and so like me, they figured their way through the world, but they come to a point where it's impossible to figure out. It's impossible to navigate, or their energy and fatigue and having figured everything out and keeping that up and masking has reached its limit, and a burnout happens. So it's not the case that everyone's going to come to a burnout. It is the case that everyone could have a burnout,
Right.
and it is the case that it's still the pathway to diagnosis for far too many people. So when we think about tools and goals and supporting autistic people, we're always trying to think about self-understanding, or self-awareness for self-understanding leading to self-advocacy. Like, we don't want someone can have the best support in the world, like I did. But if they don't recognize it as support and they don't understand it for themselves and about themselves, they will not be able to access it outside of that environment. They don't see it as the tools they have to navigate any environment.
Right.
It's just how their day goes. And by chance, they might use some of it or try some of it, but it's not this explicit, when I am overwhelmed in this situation, I can go do this. I have the right to go do this so that I can engage. So we really want to focus, like, again, we can get the best support in place for someone. If they don't know it's support, if they don't know how to use it or access it, it's not going to serve them well in the future. Because also, as many autistic people will tell you, and many autistic people know, our stims change through the course of our development too. And what brings us up or brings us down changes over the course of development. So we have to know we have to have that understanding that there may be needs that we need to meet in any given environment to get ourselves to a place where we can engage with what we need to or want to engage in. And we have to know we have the right to ask for certain modifications and accommodations that will enable us to engage. So that kind of self-understanding is what I think will hopefully support most people in avoiding that burnout.
And I think just to piggyback on that, there's this huge movement for neurodiversity affirming or individual affirming or autistic affirming support. And the whole premise of that is to create environments and situations that are easier for different neurology to be able to exist within. But the flip side of that is exactly what you're saying, Jacqueline, is it can't just be like the environment is structured this way and everything's easy throughout maybe a school day or something. And we know that the education system has a long way to go to getting to being really neurodivergent affirming. We're not saying it's puppies, rainbows, and unicorns at the moment, but let's just say you get into a scenario where everything is so smooth for somebody. You don't want an individual to graduate not knowing their neurology, not knowing their needs, and not knowing how to get those needs met. So it's not just about creating an environment that doesn't cause burnout. It's about empowering somebody to know how to meet their needs too. We need both sides of those things. And ideally, we hope we're moving in that direction. Like education today looks a lot different than it did when you were in school or even what it looked like 10 years ago or so. So, hopefully we're moving into a place where burnout won't happen as much for as many people just because environment and knowledge and society is changing, but that doesn't negate the person needing to know their own tools as well.
Yeah. And now someone else has asked, can you talk about imposter syndrome? It hits me, even though I feel totally at home as autistic, I don't really have sensory issues and I have a pretty good life at the moment. Am I cheating? Well, I always say that there is no one that knows everything you go through and how you're thinking and processing and experiencing the world better than you. And don't let any manual, quote, professional, or even any other autistic person dictate that. It's an identity for a reason. I don't consider it cheating, and I don't think anyone ever takes that identity lightly. That's not true.
It's not true.
I do think there is some. Well, this is with any identity, and the younger generation.
Some people are trying things on.
They'll just claim it, like today I'm kind of thing, which I think is problematic for the larger populations of those identities to begin with. But also they're like teenagers and they try everything on. So I'm not going to go to war about that. But no, you living your life having experienced multiple environments and having gone through your human development and knowing your history, there is no one in a better position to identify than you. And I know that from what I said a little bit earlier, the imposter syndrome thing is not something that ever really was an issue for me. I have heard many people talk about it and read many accounts of it. So from what I have read, it's not like these magic words are going to maybe free your mind from thinking these things. But I think that the person is their own best diagnostician.
I think that statement's the most important thing to say, that the person's their own best diagnostician. And I think for you to sit here and say, or stand here and say, you've never experienced imposter syndrome, your social motivation and social understanding are both very low. Mm-hmm. Imposter syndrome comes from wondering what somebody else is going to think about how you're identifying. That is not ever going to enter into Jacqueline's mind. So in case you're kind of wondering why you might experience that and she might not all autistics have the same social profile, even though their social differences that come with being autistic. It's going to present differently. And so someone like Jacqueline, who has zero social motivation and zero social understanding as well.
And I think like society too is probably creating more imposter syndrome, as it says like, oh, but actually these like profound people are really the real, they're the real deal. They're the real thing.
Right.
I think that also really is going to cause more harm than good, to put it lightly.
Thank you, CDC, yesterday.
Someone asked, I think it would be good if you started off on this. Do you have recommendations for talking to preschoolers about how to approach and play with autistic peers who may be at different communication levels?
I have lots of thoughts.
Well, but I will start with one thing.
Okay, she's gonna start.
We absolutely
She's wordsing all over the place.
Peer education. We love peer education. We do. That is a place to go, a place to move. If we don't both, we like to talk about this cross-cultural understanding. So like, it's not that you can't teach me about neurotypical people and their norms and their ways of being. I want to know. It helps with predictability. It's kind of amusing. Like again, they tell themselves stories in their head about shapes that are moving on a screen. It's very amusing. And I want to know about it. But I don't ever want to be held to those expectations, to those standards. I cannot. And I always say now, like in any other situation, acting out someone else's culture is really disrespectful and wrong. But for some reason, in this case, they want the autistic people to act out the neurotypical culture. And that's not going to work. And I would never expect the neurotypicals to act out the autistic culture. They wouldn't be very good at it. And it doesn't work for anyone. They'd be the ones burning out if they had to keep up with all of this. So cross-cultural education and peer education, making sure there's actually a two-way street where it's not just, we're going to teach all the autistic people about these neurotypicals and why certain things might be unexpected or whatever.
Right.
But teaching non-autistic peers about autistic culture and what might be different there at a young age, preferably when everything isn't, okay, meh, great, yeah, diversity, cool, I think is a big step forward. Okay.
You did a really nice job thoroughly answering that question, but I'll give some practical ideas too. So one of the things that we did a few years ago now with the community on our Facebook community was redefine autism for a children's dictionary, because it was the most horrific thing that you had ever read. It was it the Merriam-Webster Children's Dictionary?
I think it was Oxford.
It could have,
whatever.
It couldn't.
It was a major one.
It couldn't have been worse. I mean, every horrendous stereotype was incorporated in that children's dictionary. And the idea of, a young child flipping through that and reading this is the definition of autism was just horrendous. So we kind of did this crowdsourcing, and it took a long time to come to a very simple definition that works for everybody. It works for adults too. And basically it's autism is a different kind of brain. And then it kind of goes from there. And so when we talk about preschoolers, we want to talk about diversity in neurology, not just in terms of gender and skin color and race and ethnicity. And we want to bring neurodiversity into things as well. And so starting with those conversations early is really important. Now, we know there are some great resources that are being constructed and created that are helping youngsters understand neurodiversity. And one of our favorite go-to ones is out of the UK. It's called NeuroBears. So Neuro Bears. And it's by Pandas Online. And each bear represents kind of a different neurotype, and the pandas are the autistic ones. They're awesome. But they have like 5-minute videos that just talk about like, we're all bears, but each of these bears needs something different. And it's a nice way to set up those conversations. Two other things.
No one goes and says, you polar bear, I need you to be eating this bamboo. If you don't eat this bamboo, we're taking away a sticker. And also the polar bear will rip the person's head off if that happens. So
good point. So there's some really easy, practical resources that people can get their hands on. One of the other things that we think about in this kind of diversity and embracing is modeling. When we're supporting youngsters, when we talk about peer education, it's not just about doing the lesson on diversity and showing the video. It's about getting down on the floor and playing with kids in all different ways and calling attention to ways that kids play differently. Like, and being able to support that for somebody. And then the other resource that you all might be familiar with to kind of facilitate some of these conversations that we've created is our Bumper, our whole body learner, who is our robot, who is the alternative to whole body listening. And yes, we know Larry's had a makeover, but Bumper was on the scene before Larry got his makeover. And Bumper's just really different because he's not a whole body listener, he's a whole body learner. And it is amazing. We haven't had anyone use it in a preschool yet, but we've had lots of kindergarten classes use it. So just a year older, like age 5.
Integrated kindergarten.
Yeah, absolutely. And just the ability to just talk about what does your body look like it's when you're learning, how do you take in information? And you know what? 5-year-olds know. Like we don't give 5-year-olds enough credit. We've had kids be like, I listen best when my legs are wrapped around the chair. And the teacher's like, you know that about yourself? And the kid's like, yeah. And there are kids who say they need time outside or they need to be sitting next to a certain person or and so just being able to
and then they draw themselves learning and they all get to see what their peers look like and how different it is among all of their peers. And just that lesson is so powerful. And I think that's like a theme that I see that someone's asking about resources for older, cross-cultural understanding for older students as well. That's a theme that we try to keep throughout the development is like the diversity among us. Everyone needs different things. And when you're older, that might not come out in like a Bumper lesson. Maybe it's coming out in PE class and what movement, how do certain movements make you feel and your body feel, and what does this do for you versus someone else? Could be one way, or like different study methods in classrooms. But I think this idea of like, we all need different things to be able to engage in the same activity. What does that look like for you? And knowing that there's going to be a range is key.
Yeah.
It's a key underlying component.
And not just, again, it's not just doing that one lesson, it's like living it. So these kindergarten teachers who've done those lessons, they use that language to go back to, and they'll be like, hey, I see you're really paying attention. You're doing X, Y, and Z, like calling attention to things for people. So people are kind of living and noticing these differences as they go. And as Jacqueline said, this idea for older students, it's just that, so we've had one example. There's a middle school teacher in Australia, New Zealand.
Down under.
It's escaping me right now, but they were doing a lesson on energy with their particular middle school student who had integrated opportunities in the school. They had some pull-out services, but were also integrated in class. And the energy concept really resonated for the student. And the student had huge regulatory needs as well. And they started talking about it. And this student did a peer education for her classmates. She went into her regular class and talked about energy and what it meant for her. And then she had all of the students in her class fill out their own energy meters and create their own. And then they shared them. And it became this huge thing. And that was in middle school. And the professional was like, oh my gosh, that experience for all the students, but they kept that language, like the language stayed for the class. It became part of the culture.
Yeah. And I'm going to go back to Elizabeth's question in a second, because this is related. It seems like there's a lot of resources for K through 12 teachers' classrooms, but not enough for preschool. I think part of that is because of the developmental level of preschoolers, where we're not going to be handing them things to read or language heavy things to take in or reflect upon, because they're just not developmentally there. However, we have had preschools, for example, that switch their entire morning meeting from a feelings check-in to an energy check-in that becomes really concrete about, am I a hibernating bear? Am I a hound on the hunt? Or am I a buzzy bee? And it's been really insightful for the students, because someone might say, oh, I'm a hibernating bear. And the teacher might say, you are bouncing and buzzing all over this classroom. Your body is nonstop. Are you really a hibernating bear? It's concrete. Right. Whereas if someone says, I'm sad.
I'm so sad.
Or even sit out there. It's an abstract concept, and people can add emotion onto energy arousal if they grasp that, but there's no need to still communicate what's going on in your body. And it's a great place to start for a preschool room, to begin to understand, like, what is my body doing? What is my brain doing? What do I need? So I think in part there's less resources because we have so many things that we can print and hand to and give to the older students who have more symbolic language and reflective capabilities.
Right.
But I think too at I don't know, when I'm in preschool rooms, I feel like in most cases things are just going much better, because for any student, we're like, we have to build in movement. We have to build in tactile components. We have to do hands-on things. We have to be really explicit about how we're building predictability. But that doesn't mean it shouldn't be documented somewhere for people who want to read the information or understand exactly why it's working that way.
I think one of the other things, in addition to the NeuroBears resource that we said, which would be great to show to preschoolers, there's so many children's books that are being written now. There's one by Reframing Autism that's called Just Right for You, and it really does talk about differences in experiencing the world, and it's done in this really playful way with all these really different looking characters, but just reading that during a story time could be really powerful. There's another one that is not out yet, but I'm anxiously waiting for our copy to come. We pre-ordered it, which is called A Day with No Words, which is Tiffany Hammond's book, who writes Fidgets and Fries on Facebook and Instagram and elsewhere, looking at the experience of a non-speaking autistic individual, her son. And that's going to be a wonderful resource. I mean, there's just so many different things that are coming out that are kind of multimedia now, that if we just get those things into a classroom, and we as adults are the ones who are doing kind of the modeling of, oh, you like to play with it this way, so-and-so likes to play with it this way. There's so many different ways to play. It's not that we need a specific curriculum. It's that we need in this month of Autism Level Up, but we need true awareness. We need to build true awareness of difference to build the acceptance in young children.
Yeah, and someone has added that parent education can be a crucial thing at the preschool level.
Oh, that's a really good point.
Which is a great point. And they're preschool teachers and educators knowing about things they can send to parents or give to parents, or things they can point parents to, is also a great thing. Okay, let's see what Elizabeth said. Have you ever successfully decreased the sensory noxiousity of a 4-year-old daycare classroom's bathroom?
No.
Oh, that's like a damned if you do, damned if you don't, because people will put the chemical sprays in there to try to drown out the scents. And that I would rather smell poop. I would rather smell poop and pee. I do have a thing, and Amy knows this because she's a frequent offender of water splatters. I can't stand.
I know they all were like, "Where's she going with this?"
I can't stand water splatters in this, in sinks, seeing all the water droplets randomly everywhere. I have to wipe it with a paper towel. I do it in public bathrooms. I do it on airplanes. I do it in any bathroom I go into where the water has splattered and is somewhere. And with young children, that's inevitable. And sometimes it's probably not water. And that's a chaotic thing. Chaotic. So sometimes I just watch Amy go, and the hands drip and they don't just drip over the sink, they drip on the counter. And then there's like driplets on the paper towel holder, and the paper towel gets torn at a crazy angle off of the periphery and strewn like the paper is flying off of the thing and hanging out there. And I have to come and get the paper towel and fix it and then wipe out the sink. And I love Amy, but sometimes I also walk into her kitchen and have to shut every drawer and cabinet, and we have different ways of traveling through environments and the trails that we leave. And it's beautiful in its own way.
The diversity, embrace the diversity, Jacqueline.
People are agreeing. Elizabeth feels affirmed and adds, do you think there should at least be a door on the bathroom instead of the whole 2 toilet setup? Anyone can come in. There's not a door. Is that a safety thing?
I think it depends on the school you're in, and probably it might even
and
be
like the door can't be locked and stuff.
Right.
I guess I have peed in some of those where the door can't be locked.
It probably does depend, but I mean, do I think there should be a door? I think there should be a door from a sensory perspective of kind of keeping those two environments separate, but also from a body autonomy and a safety standpoint, having those two environments, like a classroom environment and a bathroom or a bathroom environment, be separate. Like we want to teach kids that their bodies are their own. There's nothing to be ashamed of, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about safety, and we're talking about body autonomy.
Yeah. I think go forth with that advocacy effort. I also just want to say to my fellow water splatter people, I have to confess, because of this sensory trigger, I think the biggest part of my carbon footprint is the rate at which I go through paper towels. I just am like constantly like,
but you have
and my sink drips, and the dogs are also water splatterers,
especially,
and I love them. But
especially Wookie, the Bernese Mountain Dog. There's a big pile.
Sometimes my dog drinks and drinks and drinks like she's chugging water, and it's all very neat and tidy. And then she looks up at me, and it all just goes all over the place, and I have to get the paper towel and wipe it up because the splatters, they're splattery. But when water comes down and it makes perfect little beads, I love that. When I make it make beads. I used to be in the shower when I was younger for like, I don't even know how long. This is not when you were younger. No, I don't have the right dripping pattern to be able to do it now. But I would let the water drip down on me, and my arm would look like one of those sheets of the candy dots. Like it was so perfect.
You could time it perfectly.
Yeah.
You can think about it. Okay.
I could go on forever
but
about
I was
water.
I was going to talk about your carbon footprint and the fact that you have bought bamboo paper towel things now, and papaya.
Yeah,
things,
and they work well, right. But if they get too saturated or they're too dry and they won't absorb it, I have to reach for the paper towel.
I'm just giving you the shout out that you have tried to reduce your paper towel usage.
Right. But I guess if that's my biggest contribution, it's not so bad. Oh my goodness. I should tell you all, I never wear hats. Just speaking of sensory and real life things, I never ever wear hats, but
very rarely.
I've been digging out the same spot of my scalp for too long. I love it. It's amazing. I bust into it every day, let it bleed out, and it forms like this crusty, amazing thing.
It's large now.
But now I'm like not growing hair in the spot, and I decided that I was going to try on my terms. I decided I was going to try not to keep excavating in this spot. So I'm putting myself on record to tell the world that I am trying to not make a larger bald spot on my head.
It is important to say that it was your decision, because you sent me a picture of it. I mean, I know it's there, but you sent me a picture of it, and I was like, oh no. But I knew enough not to tell you, like, hey, have you tried this instead? Because that was never going to work.
Well, we have a question.
Okay.
This is from Teresa, who is under the cover of Paul right now because can't change the name. How can I advocate more for my first grader during recess who is very socially motivated but has had repeated negative social encounters from peers? Okay, so I mean, there's a lot of factors there, like the nature of the negative social encounter. Is this a case where the person is going to try to play with people in some way and it's not going well? Are they being left out, rejected, or do they want to get in but are not successful in even trying to get in? There's a lot of layers there, I think, to look at. One thing I'll say is if some of the peer education piece is available, definitely do some of that. Again, just like it makes it more predictable for an autistic person when we have some understanding about why the neurotypes are doing some of the things they're doing. The same goes for neurotypical kids. I mean, most kids will laugh and do what they do unless they have some reason to understand it differently. But many of them laugh when they're either afraid or they don't know what to do. And it's
uncertain.
Yeah, it's uncertain. It's not necessarily, I want to be laughing at this other child because it feels good or whatever. It's like, I don't know what's happening here. I don't know what else to do. So arming them with that information can be really powerful too. I would say if there's a way to start out with games that have very explicit rules and roles, that can be very powerful. That's much easier, at least for me, than something unstructured. And getting a group familiar in that way can more naturally lead to unstructured play if it's going to happen. But yeah, games with rules is a great thing. The other thing I will say is, so the student wants to play, and that's important.
Yeah.
If this was a case where we thought it would be good for the student to try to play, I would say, don't work on this during recess. Like, that's the person's break. If we don't know that they want it, we're not going to work at recess. Right. But we have to also recognize that even if they want it, if they're going to engage in a way that might be different than they typically do, that's going to be tiring. That's going to be some work. Right. And they might actually need a recess after their recess for real. Because that can be a challenge to, at least at first, when the things are unknown and new and unfamiliar. And then I think there's also room to check in with that person to say, so participating in this way, how does that feel? What does it do to your energy? Do you like it? Do you want to continue? Right. Are there things, that, like, we think that if the other kids did this, it might help you. Do you think that? Again, I don't know how old this person is, how reflective they are, or anything like that, but these are things that we can think about.
So you say 6.
Okay. So I think starting with a very structured thing, maybe sometime if it's yucky out and there's indoor recess and games come out, it's a really easy, controlled environment to kind of break someone into that grouping. But yeah, it really depends on, like, I'd want to see the whole dynamic, really.
And not knowing anything about how they want to engage and what they want to engage in and how they do engage, I think. But that idea of a structured game is a really powerful, because if all the children have the same focus, that's going to be really helpful. It might be, and we don't know because we don't know your child at all, it might be that we want to preview how to play that game with your child so that they know how to take part, they know how to fill their role, they know what the other kids are going to be doing. So that's not unpredictable. That may or may not be a factor, but that's something that I think we often see people overlook. So yeah, this common focal point of having a game with these things. And it's not so much we're going to preview this so you know exactly how to do it and like you have to do it this way. It's more like so it's not unpredictable for them when they get into it, that they know what the possibilities of it are. Is a really good thing to think about.
Good questions.
Indeed. I don't think we've missed any, have we?
I don't think so, but if we haven't answered your question and you definitely wrote one, feel free to put it in again. I'll see it. Nothing's moving. I have my glasses on and I've been taking them off a lot because I keep thinking they're dirty, but I have a scratch on them. There's really a scratch. And that's really annoying.
I'm sorry.
In my visual field, it's going to be a problem. Yeah.
These won't be long for the world.
All right. So we will probably wrap up here in a few minutes. Please,
unless something else pops in.
Right. Please put your questions in now if you still have them, if there's some burning question. Do you have any burning questions for me?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I always have questions for you. That's usually how I start conversations. I have a question for you.
Yeah, that's true.
Or can I ask you something? It's all about previewing. That predictability is really important in this spot.
It's true.
The dogs think we're done because they're both here right now. No, I don't think so. I think we're just. I guess what I would say is if people have ideas.
Here's a question. Okay, you don't even have to start on your words.
Can I words quickly though?
Okay, very quickly.
Very quickly, I'm going to words and just say. I'm sure people have noticed that when we release new supports and things like the recent one, communication safety cards, like we're doing this either based on consults that we're in and tools that we see need to be available widely for people, or we're doing it in response to community requests. So if you're in a situation and you do have questions about something or you're wondering about a support for, we're constantly asking people to kind of connect with us, whether to email us or go through Facebook Messenger, which sometimes gets lost, to be honest with you, because I get overwhelmed by that inbox. But to message us and kind of ask us, because that's our job is to help create tools and strategies that are this useful reality, that are actually what people need to be able to navigate. Yes, that's what I wanted to words about.
Perfect.
Thank you.
So how about Hannah? Teaching kids that they're autistic when the message seems unwelcome. And I'm assuming in this case you mean from the kid themselves. I think they're a preschool age specifically. So I think that's tough because I don't think a preschooler can know what autistic means.
Right.
And in that case, I think again, the general classroom culture of how do you learn and that looking different from student to student is a good one.
Right.
I think you can bring up the word and explain like through some of these means of videos of what that might look like or what that might mean.
There's so many children's books.
And that doesn't mean that, like a 3-year-old has to be like, I am this autistic identity. That's not realistic. And, even for adults who have like fully developed brains, supposedly, they get stuck in what stereotypical autism is. So I think the important thing is that we have these ideas out there that brains are different. Just like a skin color can be different, a brain can be different. And that's going to influence how people experience everything in the world, everything that happens to us, our brain processes. So brain differences make a true difference. We don't need to be telling 3-year-olds, here's your identity, here's your brain status, but we want them all to know that we expect there to be differences. Mm-hmm. And then at some point, when I think they're perhaps a little developmentally older, that might really resonate with them, and they might that might have a lot more meaning, and they might understand that fully and be able to appreciate it rather than it's just something that like is weird and different from everyone else. And I don't want that.
And I think one of the other things is just normalizing it, which sounds so easy to say it that way, mm-hmm. because in the culture and the states that we live in, or as in like states, not a state, we live in, we know that autism often has a negative connotation to it. We're working very hard to change that perception, hence the change of the children's definition and all those other things that we've talked about. But it is about the creating the culture of autism is just a difference. And that's so important. So I think just a few weeks ago, we republished on Facebook our tool that's called To Tell or Not to Tell, Why It Shouldn't Be a Question. And that really has a perspective of 8 different autistic people in it, but also a mother of a very young autistic child who was at that time non-speaking, minimally speaking. And that mother writes so eloquently about like it was just always a fact. It was something that was always talked about in the home. It never thought about hiding it from it, never thought about making it othering or different. It was just, this is part of our lives. And I think that the way she writes it is so much articulate and so much more beautiful than that. But it's just this whole idea that autistic isn't other, autistic is just different. And so being able to embrace that difference and that diversity from the beginning. So again, the more that we can do, especially in these young ages, to help autistic youth know that it's just different, but the kids around them know that it's just different too, we'll have a much better society going forward.
I agree. It's a lofty goal, but hopefully it gives some ideas of, I guess the overall is like, don't force the message on them that they're autistic. Force the message that we expect different brains, and we expect that will come with different challenges and also victories and strengths for different people. So that's the way I would go in my dream preschool, which is a topic for another live.
It's a utopian spot.
It's quite functional. Well, we thank you all for joining us and contributing your questions and all the ways that you are yourself leveling up or helping others to level up. And I don't know, what was the material?
It's called To Tell or Not to Tell, Why It Shouldn't Be a Question. And if you go into our supports and our tools tab, and if you can't find it in one of the buttons, just go into the all button, which is the last button on the menu, and you should be able to
if you just
type that in.
To tell or not to tell, you'll find it.
Yeah. If you can't find something where you think it should be, that all button is very useful. It's even useful for me.
Basically, my dream preschool, just because someone wants to know, is a place where we start from energy and we start from those ideas of, for all students, we are trying to build cross-cultural understanding, and that includes of brain types, and the self-understanding, self-awareness, and self-advocacy piece. And so we don't have curriculum of like math and letters yet. We want to teach people to learn how they learn. If we can teach people to learn how they learn, they can learn anything. And that is what we need in society, in my idea. So it would start from energy because it's more concrete and more accessible to a wider range of students because of how concrete it is. As those students develop and grow, some of them that are wired for the social are going to naturally start putting emotion labels in there. But some of them won't. And that's okay, because everyone else will still know what they're talking about when they're not using these made up emotion words. And they'll still have a way to indicate what's going on in their body and where they want their body to be to engage in some activity. So starting from this foundation really young, I think is critical, because as many of us know, once you get to older kids, like I said before, everything starts getting whatever. Yeah, this is lame. And it won't be until like some college class of like diversity training where they're like, oh yeah, this makes sense. This is justice and this is equity, and yeah, this is great. But that time in between is like, leave me alone. So this focus on self-awareness, for self-understanding and self-advocacy. That is anyone knowing what their needs and rights are, how to meet them, and how to navigate an environment in that way. And this is over time. We're not saying 3-year-olds are going to master this.
But you're going to plant the seeds.
We're planting the seeds.
Planting the seeds.
The idea of forget curriculum. We need people to learn how they learn best, because then, I mean, you know, when you find your way of taking in information and processing it, you can go and flow and take tons in. There is so much I am going back to that I, quote, learned in school that I'm only actually learning now because I understand how I learn, how I take it in. I can be like pedaling a bike in motion, standing, pacing, things that weren't school things.
Right.
So learning how to learn is huge. And then the cross-cultural understanding, just the expectation that like there's not all of us and then some of these people who are X, whatever. It's that even within my own brain type, there's huge diversity in how people meet their needs and learn and take in information. That is a powerful thought and way to go about things. So my dream preschool is a beautiful place. And
she's also got a lot of predictability built into it, a ton of movement, and a really great soundtrack that you need to finish sometime.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to end this stream, and the recording will be available. Thank you all for coming. Who knows, maybe if people comment and give suggestions, we'll do another one of these at some point, more than we do. Like the last one we did was a year ago.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.